consent. So, so we are going to start now. It's a pleasure to welcome you all here at this event on behalf of the direction. As many of you know, the ICM has incorporated the equality and diversity as a transversal priority in its strategic plan. And in line with this commitment of keeping advancing and improving in this area, we work to deepen in the understanding of equality and making it more inclusive and more integrated into our scientific and institutional practices. And at the same time, we are committed to develop the best possible tools to integrate the gender perspective into our research, with the understanding that a more diverse and inclusive science is a better science. So today's event is one of the initiatives that allows us to reflect collectively on these challenges, and is part of the efforts of the Equality and Diversity Task Force of the ICM that extend not only internally within the Institute, but also internationally, helping to position the Institute as a reference institution in this field as well. So for me, you know that I don't normally introduce this kind of events. So today I'm doing it. And for all these reasons, it's an honor to introduce the speakers and this event and the speakers who specifically will be joining us today. So I'm going to read now. The keynote will be delivered by Victoria Showunmi. Sorry, yeah. She's Professor of Interdisciplinary Studies in Gender, Race and Identity at the Institute of Education, at the University College of London. Her research interests are gender, identity, and race through the lens of intersectionality, focusing on leadership and the lived experience of Black women and girls. She develops fresh conceptual frameworks focusing on equity and social justice, especially the interplay between people and the sophistication of behaviors which lead to disengagement with the promotion of equality. The other two speakers are Yvonne Galligan. She's a professor emerita in TU Dublin and honorary fellow in Trinity College Dublin. She has published extensively on gender equality in politics. Among other awards, in 2024, she received the Sir Isaiah Berlin Prize for professional contribution to political studies by the Political Studies Association. And then Rachel Palmer is a senior researcher based at the Universitat Oberta de Catalunya. Raquel, I don't know. Okay. Based at the Universitat Oberta de Catalunya in Barcelona. She has worked on various European Commission-funded projects to promote gender equality in research and innovation. She is currently coordinator of the INSPIRE, the European Centre of Excellence on Inclusive Gender Equality in Research and Innovation, a Horizon Europe project for €5 million over 4 years with 14 partners in Europe and Latin America. And the last one is Sara Clavero, that will be the moderator. She's a research fellow at the EDI Directorate at TU Dublin and deputy director of the AIB Research Center on Inclusive and Equitable Cultures. Sara is co-facilitator in the SUSTEM community of practice for the INSPIRE project, together with Silvia Donoso of the ICM. Thank you. So you.
Okay, good morning, everybody. You managed to brave it and get here with the wind and the rain and goodness knows what else. I thought, wow, this is a good start. But anyway, it's nice. It's nice to be by the sea. We had a nice walk by the sea yesterday. Well, we didn't about walk, but we got blown along. Oh, do I have to use this? Yes? All right, sorry, can you hear me now? Yes? Okay, I apologize. I'm somebody who walks around, so I have to stand here because I normally kind of walk around and things like this, but I'll do my best. Okay. So I'm saying good morning. Did you hear me when I said that? I said I went for a walk yesterday in the sea, walking along the pier, which was lovely, and had some good time. So I've got a certain amount of time, so I've got my timer on to do this with you, and I want to start off. I want to read something very quickly, just to set the scene. If you can't hear me at the back, please wave to me and say, Victoria, can't hear. If, for example, I'm speaking too quickly, please say we can't understand you, you're speaking too fast, I will slow down. All right, so please, I want to do that. I've called this little reading I want to do Visible, Invisible Women in Academia. I want to begin with a moment that returned to me as I was writing about what it means to be visible and invisible within higher education. A moment that reveals why we must rethink how we study gender. I was invited to a seminar for researchers who are exploring the experience of women in higher education. Thank you. The room was alive with certainty. People spoke freely about gender. They mapped the barriers. They celebrated the progress. The story sounded smooth, too smooth. At the back of the room was a woman who had not yet spoken. She watched the rhythm of the conversation with great care. Every example pointed toward one kind of woman. Every assumption settled around one familiar narrative. Every solution seemed to rest on an uncomplicated starting point. The smoothness kept catching my attention. Smooth stories always hide someone. Near the end, the woman lifted up her hand. She spoke quietly. She did not hesitate. She said, "You've spoken about women, but you have not spoken about women like me." The room fell silent. Not a defensive silence, a startled one. Then came the twist. A researcher responded with complete sincerity. We did not realize that the experience could be different. The single sentence exposed the real issue, not hostility, not refusal, a failure of imagination, a framework that could not recognize complexity, a lens that flattened experience, a narrative that included some women while assuming the rest would simply fold themselves in. She was fully visible in the room, yet invisible in the research. This is the tension I've written about. Women who carry complicated forms of difference often find themselves present but unacknowledged. Their realities are lived, their challenges are real, yet existing frameworks do not know how to hold them. This is why intersectionality matters. It interrupts the smooth story. It widens the field of vision. It insists that gender research must account for full contours of human experience, not only the familiar or the uncomfortable. That moment in the seminar revealed something important. It was not simply a personal oversight, it was a structural one. A framework had been built that could not hold complexity. A framework that answered the question of gender before research had even begun. And this brings me to my first point I want to explore today. If we want to inspire real change, we must begin by recognizing the limitations of traditional gender research. Not to dismiss it, but to understand how often it has centered a single narrative and invited everyone else to fit themselves inside it. So take a moment just to think about what I've just said. I'm going to then take you on a journey. You may feel uncomfortable. You may feel defensive. You may say who she thinks she's talking to. You may say all of these things in your mind. May not be deliberate, but you might say those. And that's okay. I can deal with that. I have dealt with so many different things that it's not a problem. I've called this Inspiring Change, How Intersectionality Reconfigures the Foundations of Gender and Research. What you see when you see standing here is I'm a woman and I'm a black woman. Now you might say I'm a black woman or I'm a woman of a black, whichever one you want to do, I am here and I'm visible, all right? So let's begin. So I want to really start to think about why gender research needs reconfiguring. I'm going to do a little bit about that. What intersectionality actually does, how intersectionality transforms research and the kind of questions we use around that, methodological shifts, what researchers must actually do differently, and the promise how intersectionality inspires real change. I will do my best in the limited time I have. So if you're expecting to know everything, you won't know that. There is a small little clip of a YouTube, which I hope works as well. If it doesn't, it doesn't, but we'll see how it works. So the first thing you see here, we're pulling along a big weight of gender. We collectively as women are always going to be pulling this big boulder along, and I don't think anybody disagrees with that at all. When I asked you this question, I want to just jot it down on your phone, on your notepad, on your laptop, whatever it is, or just in your mind. Which lens are you using today when we sit in this particular space? Which lens? I'm going to give you a moment just to think about that. Think about it. Which lens? I'm going to give you a little bit of time, which is just less than a minute. You've got 20 seconds and I'm just counting. Write something down or think about it. Which lens are you using today as we sit in this space? Okay, anybody at the back? Anything you'd like to say? Just one word. Which lens are you using today? You can shout out. If you was online, you'd unmute yourself and you'd say what you want to say. What would you say? One person at the back. There's a gentleman at the back. What lens are you using today as you're sitting here? Hiya. I can't hear you. Okay, decolonization. Thank you very much. Lovely to be involved with that. Thank you. Coming down to the next row here, the person sitting on the end there with a stripy top. What lens are you using? Open-minded. Okay, that's Claudia. Thank you, Claudia. Behind you, the lady with a stripy jumper on, behind you there. Yes, you. Yes. Gender. Okay, gender. Thank you. The gentleman here with a jumper on, in the middle on his own. What lens are you using? Open to learn. Okay, so that's your lens you're going to use. Okay, thank you very much. Sylvie, what lens are you using today? Gender. Okay, you're using gender. Rachel? Class. Thank you very much. Carolina? Critical and decolonial. Okay, linking up to the man at the top there. And what about you? This gentleman here with his glasses and a green top, etc. What lens are you using? Openness. Anything else besides openness? More dimensional than just gender. Okay, right. Thank you. On my side. Thank you. And what about the gentleman there with his arms folded and he's got a beard? What lens are you bringing to us today? That of a manager that You think, okay, so it's complicated. A whole range of different things to think. Right, thank you. Anybody else feel they're burning to say what lens they are dealing with? What about you with your arms folded, kind of with your thumbs there, the gentleman there? What about you? Yes, you. Contact lenses. Thank you. Yes, that's a lens as well. Thank you. So it's important to understand the lens we're bringing to the room as we start the process. Right? What lens? My lens is always going to be intersectional. Always. I need to start with that. When I think about how I was brought in this world, I was given away on a train to German Jewish parents who happened to be very upper class. Now, you may not think about class, but in the UK we think about class a lot, and it's something which kind of defines you in many ways. So the lens I'm always bringing is a very intersectional kind of lens. I want to just now move into something else, and I'm going to be quite fast because I've only got a certain amount of time. So I've got here, why does gender research need reconfiguring? You might sit there and thinking, it's been okay before, we can do gender mainstreaming, we can do all these things, and it's all good. However, there's only a strong focus, which is on a single characteristic. Mostly women as monolithic. There's not much space for somebody who has a disability, is LGBTQ+, has a migration background. That becomes a challenge, and it becomes a you problem, i.e. the person's problem as against the organization or the women's network. The lack of attention, may I say, to race, class, disability, age, sexuality, religion, migration is a problematic in itself, very problematic. I did a master's which was in gender studies, and I thought about that for many years. I ticked the wrong box. It should have been women's studies. I did gender studies, which was a very different space, but needed that. The results, unified narratives exclude many women's lives. I mentioned something here as I read to you to begin with, which was a woman sitting at the back. Now, I made up that particular narrative, but it is something which happens a lot. Somebody sits at the back, they feel they're not part of what you're saying. You may celebrate, you might say, we have lots of professors which are women in our university or in our institute, whatever it is. And you then ask the question, which women are you actually speaking about? And then people go cold. And they think, well, the numbers are too small to talk about. Okay, tell me how many you have which are looking like me in your university. Well, I don't know what the numbers are. It's difficult to count, you know. Is it 1, 2, 3, or 4? Well, it's normally 0. But it's difficult to count, right? So it's normally 0. Okay, so I'm at UCL, as you know, University College London. It's number 9 in the world, etc. And has this been recorded? I can't remember. Yes? Right, okay. So it's always good to know. We talk about the fact of what we have regarding our numbers within the university. Believe it or not, we have the highest number of black female professors in the whole country. We have the highest number in the whole country. How many do you think that is? Any ideas? Hundreds? Thousands? No, okay. Well, in our university, we have around 8,600 academics. Within that, we have 57 or maybe 60 now black academics, and then ones which are full professors or grade 9, grade 10, it's about 21. And the women, we've got, in my faculty, we have the highest number, believe it or not, and I think there is about 6. So there's about 10 altogether within our university, which are black women, which are faculty, and that's the highest number in a university in the whole country. So that just gives you a bit of perspective, all right? Why gender research needs reconfiguring. When we talk about numbers, we need to think about that. I want to show you this, if it works. I don't know whether I can get it to work. I hope it does. Because this also gives you just a little tip of what it means. Hoping it works. Oh God. If it doesn't. Do what? Reload. Don't ask me too many complicated things. If it doesn't. Oh, here. Here? Which one do I need? If it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter. Yeah, I think so. There it is. There it is. That's right. Yeah. If it doesn't, it's okay. I don't want to waste time. You can copy and paste it and put it in.
Yeah, but I don't know how to copy it.
Yeah. As bad as me, don't worry. Don't worry, honestly, it's okay.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sí, ho estic intentant.
Yeah, it's okay.
Però he de fer-ho des del...
Yeah, we're both as good as each other, so don't worry. It's absolutely fine.
El wifi inverso.
Yes. I'm glad it's not just me. If I ask my daughter, she says, "Figure it out, Mum. Figure it out." So I say, "Yeah, okay, figure it out." I should have practiced. I should have put it on. Oh, there we go. Maybe. That's it. Yes, yeah, that's it. Yeah. Yeah. I can do that. Okay, this is just a couple of minutes.
So intersectionality actually came out of my effort to think about how to create a word picture so that people could understand what happens when the kind of inequality that they're prepared to deal with overlaps or has an encounter with the kind of inequality that they're not committed to, haven't even thought about, don't experience themselves, and don't necessarily feel called upon to be present in that. Intersectionality is also a frame. It's a frame that gives us a greater sense of how certain social problems come about, and importantly, what needs to be rethought in terms of the conventional interventions that we create for those inequalities when those interventions come out of narrow or non-intersectional frames. I came across a case that featured a woman named Emma DeGraffenreid. She was actually representing an entire group of Black women who were seeking better employment opportunities at an auto manufacturing plant in the Midwest. She was...
This is really important. That's why I've shown it to you. So just listen to this bit.
A wife, she was a mom, she was working class, she was really hoping to advance her family's well-being by seeking a different kind of job than the ones that typically were set aside for a woman like her. A job as a domestic worker or a job as a janitorial engineer. These were the kinds of jobs that were underpaid and that were usually without benefits. They weren't the kind of job that would allow you to actually entertain middle-class aspirations. So she was trying to get one of those better manufacturing jobs. So she applied for the job, and like other Black women, she was denied. After her denial, she sued the employer, claiming race and gender discrimination. Now, the judge that heard Emma's case dismissed her suit. And he dismissed her suit because the employer in question had, in fact, hired African Americans, and the employer had, in fact, hired women. From the court's vantage point, the fact that they'd hired African Americans and had hired women meant that they did not engage in race discrimination and they didn't engage in gender discrimination. Now, the fact that the African Americans they hired were not women, and the women that they hired were not African Americans, didn't defeat the argument that these women were unable to prove discrimination because the employer had hired blacks and had hired women. So from the court's vantage point, the problem was that for Emma to be able to say, I was discriminated against, she had to say, I was discriminated against as a black person who's a woman. I was discriminated against as a woman who's a black person. That's what she would have had to say. And the court thought that the law didn't allow her to combine these two causes of action into one. But the fact that no judge ever stopped to think, well, why is this not a symmetrical disability? How come a white class plaintiff can represent all women, even though there are differences within them, but a woman of color can't represent everyone, and the same with respect to men. So what we had here was a problem of the belief that women of color were a category in and of themselves. They could not represent themselves on their own, nor could they represent all women or all men. And this is the moment when I really started thinking about pre-existing schemas. You've heard about the story about the father who rushes his son to the hospital who's had an accident, and the surgeon begins to operate and then realizes, oh no, I can't, it's my son. And everyone's stumped by this. How can the father rush him to the hospital, and the surgeon says, he's my son too, until it hits you, duh, the surgeon is a woman. But that it takes that extra moment for it to lock into place. Now, just add into that race, class, any other kind of schema that takes even longer for it to lock in, that your pre-existing assumptions about who this person was were all wrong. That's the space for intersectionality.
Thank you. I wanted to just show you that. This one, I think. Brilliant. Got it. Okay, so that's, I wanted to do that because I wanted to just to understand. Most people don't know who Kimberly Crenshaw is, and most people don't understand, in simple terms, what intersectional is. And I thought it's important to do that before I move on. I know my time is running out, but I think it's really important to do that. So what does it actually do? So I've given you a very small explanation. What is it? What is it? What does it do? It exposes how systems, when it's to do with racism, sexism, classism, etc., overlap. And that's why I started off with, what lens do you come in with? Most people come in with a lens of universal, I'm a person, I'm this, but what lens? Are you coming in with a lens as a white male who is an older white male who's not ever thought about this and it's a single aspect? Are you coming in as a male which is LGBTQ+? What lens are you coming in with? And then that's what it actually does. The systems help to shape experiences differently than within gender categories. And I think that's really, really important, because when we're thinking about gender identities, we seem to be more comfortable about that within Europe, but we're not very comfortable when it comes to migration or nationality, and that's something which intersectionality helps with. It moves us from identity comparison to structural analysis. What we're not actually doing is looking at 150 different identities. That's not what intersection is about. And it's also not a buzzword. Remember the word diversity and how that also became a buzzword? It is not any of that neither. It is something which is structurally what we're using to be able to politically be able to make some change. How does it reform research questions? The initial thinking, all of you in this room are going to be thinking about, do women experience discrimination in academia? The answer is going to be yes. Some women may say they've never experienced discrimination in academia at all. Okay. But then the next aspect is the intersectional thought. And if you don't like the word black because it makes you feel uncomfortable and you think, why is she talking about black? Well, then put in another word like people of color or migration or nationality, whatever word you want to put in there. How do those women, if they're disabled, migrant women, LGBT, how do each of those encounter different barriers within your establishment? And that's what you have to think about. How are these produced by specific structures and policies? I've got one more thing I'm going to read to you in a moment. I know I'm running out of time, but I think it's really important to help you understand this. So the initial thinking I said is about women. We all know that women are in Europe, the mainstreaming, the GPs, gender equality plans, all of that is about gender. But then the intersectional thought is how you move it to the next step. There needs to be a shift, and what researchers must actually do differently. Move from homogenized samples to textured sampling, meaning you need to put the extra part in it. And when we talk to colleagues about that, it is hard because the numbers are so small, or because we don't want to expose the people, or there's always a yeah, but, there's a yeah, but, there's a yeah, but. And dealing with the yeah, but in itself is a challenge because it's avoidance. It's about how avoidance takes place, is the yeah, but, to how you silence someone when they're speaking about their experience and you say, well, yeah, but what about disability? So what I do now, when that comes to me, I say, well, we need to do disability, you're absolutely right. But have you ever thought about the experiences of migrant people and disability? Or other people with disability? No, they haven't. Because again, it becomes a white space. Include lived experience, narrative, inquiry, and perpetuatory approaches. Include their voices. Now, I know that people are very good at doing voices and how you bring those voices into the talk. Analyze power, not just identify categories. Analyze power. Who has the power? The power is in the pen. Who holds the pen? What does that actually mean? Design studies that can hold complexity instead of flattening it. I want to read something very quickly, and it's about half a page, but I just want to read this, which kind of sums up something as well. Which is this. This is a chapter which is in a book which is coming out. It really is a story. I write stories. I do stand-up comedy as well, and based on a lot of research and all things like this. But anyway, I've called it Quiet Harm, the Loud Impact, Sophisticated Racism in Action, right? So think about this space here, and this is what we're going to be looking at. The meeting room was bright, filled with the hum of simultaneous translations. Academics from 25 countries sat at a table, their nameplates lined up like markers of authority. When I finished presenting on why intersectionality must underpin our approach to gender research silence, silence followed, not the silence of agreement, but the silence of discomfort. Then came the question, framed politely, almost academically. Do we really need to do we really need to complicate gender with race? Isn't that a separate issue? The words were calm, but their weight was heavy. This was sophisticated racism, subtle, intellectualized, and cloaked in reason. I took a breath, aware of the eyes on me, aware of the tension in the room. My response had to do more than educate. It had to unsettle the assumption that whiteness was the default lens for gender. I leaned forward and said, when we separate race from gender, we erase the lived realities of millions of women. Intersectionality is not complication, it is clarity. The voices echoed my words in another language, and I watched as faces softened, others hardened. One of my European colleagues raised a hand, but our gender policies already include diversity. We talk about class and disability. Isn't that enough? I replied, Class matters, yes, but class does not erase race. A working class white woman does not experience the same barriers as a working class black woman, or a woman migrant navigating language and cultural exclusion. Intersectionality forces us to see these layered realities. Another voice chimed in, hesitant but firm. In our context, gender is already controversial. Adding race will make it impossible to get consensus. I felt the tension rise. For some, this was not just academic, it was political, cultural, and deeply personal. I could sense the frustration. They were comfortable with categories they could understand. Gender as binary, diversity as disability, but race was the elephant in the room. And then I knew this was not just racism or classism. It was something more sinister. What I have come to call white women syndrome. A pattern where white women dominate gender conversations, positioning themselves as the universal subject of feminism, whilst resisting inclusion of women of color. They were uncomfortable with transgender issues. This contrasted sharply with their discomfort at focusing on black women or migrant women. It was a form of gatekeeping, cloaked in progressive language, yet deeply exclusionary. I continued. If we avoid discomfort, we avoid progress. Intersectionality is not about consensus, it's about lived experience, which is often uncomfortable. The interpreter repeated my words again, slower this time, as if to make sure they landed. I noticed the subtle glances exchanged across the room, some signaling resistance, others curiosity. This was the work to hold space for discomfort, to insist on inclusion, and to name what others preferred to leave unnamed. I like to do a little bit of reading because I think it's important, because you shift off onto your phones or you shift off onto this, and so it's good to kind of bring you into something which is old-fashioned reading. So I'm saying the methodological shifts, what researchers must do are those. I've nearly finished. The promise, how intersectionality inspires real change. Think about yourselves and think about your particular lens. It provides more accurate knowledge about not just inclusive knowledge. It really opens up that particular door. It strengthens policies. You all got policies. Somebody over there was saying that they're a leader. They have to worry about their team, their staff, and all things like that. I'm a vice dean. I have to understand how I can be inclusive and how I use the intersectional aspect. The well-being in culture changes initiatives. It really does put that spark in it. It opens spaces for new stories. Instead of people rolling their eyes and thinking about the story they've heard before, you haven't heard these stories, let's put something in and let's open up those discussions. And it also helps institutions create environments where everyone can experience psychological safety. That's a word we use a lot within our university. Psychological safety, who's able to speak? I go back to the lens. When you bring your lens in the space and you're asking to be able to use that lens, is it safe for you to speak? Most of the time, I have to be very careful of speaking because it's not safe. It's not safe because people are going to react in a certain way, which will, kind of act on my own well-being. And how do I belong? I'm okay with belonging or being isolated. I'm okay with that. Many years ago, I may not have been. I've got 3 daughters and they're still working through the psychological safety and whether they belong. That's all I wanted to say, and I know I've gone over time. I've got some references there so you can have a look at those. And there's a few interesting books which I think you might like. The guy who talked about being a leader, I think he was, with his team. There's one there which is called Leadership Through the Lens of Whiteness and Intersectionality. I'm very much somebody who does whiteness and also does the issues of class and race. I suppose what I'll say to you before I finish, as I mentioned earlier, the whole aspect of intersectionality is my life because of being German Jewish, upper class, living in a white space, never had any diversity. What does that mean? How does that come to my research? My research, I've been more confident about doing stories, but not just stories, really kind of political stories, and bringing those to light. Being in this space opens up a little bit, hopefully, of a conversation around this. I only had a small amount of time. Hopefully that gives you a taster within the 25 minutes or whatever it is I had to do. So, Sylvie, over back to you. Are you doing questions now, or what are you doing next? I can't remember. You're gone silent. Hopefully that was helpful. Hope it opens up a little bit of a discussion, you know?
Okay. Can you hear me? Okay. Okay, so after the brilliant keynote by Victoria Showunmi, we are followed by about an hour in length of a round table with Victoria and Rachel and Yvonne, who were already introduced at the beginning of the session. And the title of this whole event was Intersectionality from Theory to Action. And we were, Sylvia and I, when we were discussing how to entitle the whole event, we were commenting that usually, you know, what we encounter when we organize events like that, this is very good to see what intersectionality is, what it can be done, but also in the audience usually we get people saying, but how can we do this? Or can you give us tips and examples, good practice that we have encountered in our institutions, in our different environments. So that is the idea of this roundtable with people with a lot of experience in trying intersectionality from different perspectives, research and also practice. So again, thank you very much. It was an very illuminating keynote. I have heard a lot about intersectionality, but never like, you know, so engaging, you know, like this. My first question, it follows from Victoria. And it is the following. How can advances in intersectionality in intersectional gender research, we are coming from research, inform institutional approaches to equality. And what it would mean to do that translation into genuinely transformative change in our institutions. If you know, maybe Rachel, you can start with this, and this is then open for the three of you. And if you can give examples, or I'm sure that people will be grateful. Yes.
Okay, so the question is, how can intersectionality in research then inform practices and policies?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
And how to translate that into because we are aiming to transformative change in our institutions.
Yeah. So I think that it's really important to recognise that, you know, intersectionality has been within academia. It's often a concept that people might find difficult to grasp or understand it, and then find it difficult to maybe operationalise. So it's what we've been thinking in Inspire is we've had like a twin track approach. So we've tried to like develop more knowledge looking at intersectionality, but also looking at policies. So for example, we've been trying to look at which organisational policies can really push forward different equalities, which institutional policies can push forward equality, and integrate an intersectional lens into this work. So look at very, very concrete problems, like Victoria said, you know, what sort of barriers are people facing within research performing organisations, within universities, within higher education institutions, and then really try and see how can these be operationalised. So really just bringing together people who are having different barriers and speaking to people and saying, well, you know, what barriers are you facing, providing a safe space that people can come and talk about the issues that they're facing, and then co-create with people in power possible ways forward to try and overcome these sort of barriers. So trying to operate on different levels. Often in universities, the academic space may be very separate from the practitioner space. So also try and create these spaces where we can learn from these academic advances in these fields, but also value practitioner knowledge to really create this sort of dynamic change process that involves academics as well as practitioners. That's what we've been trying to work on.
So thank you very much, Sarah, for the question, and also Victoria for your amazing keynote. I always learn something new listening to you. I just want to give you a little bit of information. Sarah said when she read my biog that I gave her, she said, Yvonne, you have erased your EDI experience from your biography. And that's because I have recently retired and I'm thinking to the future and my new me in my returning to my discipline instead of being all consumed by leading on equality, diversity and inclusion in my institution. So I do speak with a background of knowledge around implementing EDI as well. Sarah's question provoked me to think about how much research around an intersectionality framework is actually going on in universities. In my own institution, for example, in the institution Sarah and I share, I'd say that there is in fact very, very little research on intersectionality taking place. And that is its own starting point, because then one must find ways of bringing that lens on research and that analysis of power and that analysis of positioning into the dialogue that takes place within the research culture of the university. And as we work in a technological university, where the dominant frame of thinking is based around an engineering approach to the world, where everything falls into neat boxes and everything slots neatly together, it's actually quite a challenge to begin to break down that overarching dominant frame of reference into a more nuanced way of understanding the research that people are undertaking and understanding their world experience in a more complex way. So I think we have a lot of work to do in that regard. And this is where working with our practitioners as well as our academics, as Rachel has already said, really matters. Finding that space for having conversations around real people's lives and real stories and experience that bring an intersectional lens to the equation. So, for example, we found when we conducted a staff survey initially about 3 years ago, we found that one of the most marginalized people that felt most marginalized, although on the surface one wouldn't think so, were gay men in the organization. They felt as if they were really discriminated against in terms of promotional pathways, in terms of being themselves in the workplace, that issue of psychological safety. They felt incredibly unsafe as gay men in our organization. And so this led to a discussion around the intersection of gender identity and sexual identity, where in fact the people that felt most confident in navigating that space were women who were from the LGBT community. And they were the ones that gave leadership to the men in that space. And now there's a little bit of a change of culture now, and people are more accepting and more aware of the intersections of those discriminations. Another example I might give was when we were developing a strategy for EDI and trying to uncover what was going on beneath the surface. We held a focus group only for Black women in the university. Now, we have a university of 3,000 or so staff and 28,000 or so students. We leave the students aside for the moment, although they are central to our both mission and to our focus of our activities. But we decided that even though our Black women employed in the university, or women who wanted to come forward as identifying in that way, were only maybe 15 women in total out of 3,500 staff, we still felt this experience was important. And so I think that for us, the intersectionality and the real understanding of what we needed to do to change came from that kind of focus group and how they experienced being in our university. And that brought forward, ultimately, a very strong race equality agenda that we work on in in the EDI directorate.
I'll be very quick. So to that question which you asked, as I mentioned, I made reference to that. I'm also a Vice Dean. So I'm a Vice Dean and my particular area is as EDI. Within our university, there's 11 faculties and there's 11 Vice Deans in those particular faculties. So I wanted to say a couple of things. One is about the pay gap. So I'm also very high up in the union. I'm on the national executive of the union. I'm very much like that. So pay gap, and when we talk about the pay gap, when we talk about gender, I'm also asking what does that look like for women which are not white when we're talking about pay gap. And it's normally, you know, we haven't actually done the data for that as yet, but we do need to start doing the data. So when we talk about women, so pay gap is one thing. Looking at funding, who gets what funding, who gets pushed forward to be able to do the funding, early career researchers, what's going on with those people when we think about those in early career and also with an intersectional lens. The other one is also around expectations and publications. Who published with who? I never published with anybody within my faculty to this day. My publications are with people outside of my faculty, i.e. in other countries. Why? Why is it that, you know, there's colleagues within in the faculty? Why aren't they publishing with myself? Those things also make a big difference when we think about who gets into which ones. And I think the last thing I wanted to say is about research and whose research counts. And we have the ref in the UK. I don't think you have the ref. So we have the ref, and it's whose research counts through an intersectional lens. So that's also going through a big discussion around equity and what that looks like. So that's just one thing. It's the research excellence. It's called the Research Excellence Framework. That's what it is. It's called the REF. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much to the three of you. Very great examples. I'm going to the next question. As Victoria mentioned, very clear in her talk, gender equality initiatives privilege the experiences of advantaged women, like white women, and she spoke about the invisibility of Black women. Now, having conversations about racism and classism are very uncomfortable conversations. So a question is, how can we start with those conversations in our institution? And how can we sustain those conversations so that these are successful? I don't know who wants to start. Maybe Victoria, given that you raised the
make you feel uncomfortable. So, is everybody okay at the back? Okay. I would say the first thing is really being able to talk about yourself and who are you. And it may be a bit of a cliche thinking, well, does that matter? You need to understand who you are. Because if you don't understand who you are and you can't turn around and say, when you look in the mirror, I'm a white male, I'm a white female, or I'm from Latino or wherever I'm from. If you can't do that, then the best thing is to not get involved and don't have the conversation, because you need to be able to say that. The second thing you need to be able to say is, I'm a white male, female, whoever, and I've also got a disability. Okay, let's own it. If you can't do that, neither will then again, don't start looking at other people's issues to do with disability if you can't talk about your own. So what I'm getting at, be comfortable with who you are and be authentic. And I think that's how we get the conversations. We get the conversations within our university. We've got 51,000 students. We've got 18,000 plus staff. It's large, all complex, very elite establishment, which means that everybody's coming in with all different things, or really wants to be, grappling with each other and talking about race, but understanding the context of race within the context they're coming with. So if we're looking at colorism, we're looking at passing, how you pass, how you sit in a space like this and you think yourself as white. When you come to the UK and all of a sudden you're not seen as white because you've got an accent. And I think it's being able to understand yourself and understand the context. People find that complicated because they're not honest with themselves. If you're honest with yourself and you've been hiding yourself, you will be found out. And I think that's the most important thing. The second point, which I would say, is having those conversations and feeling that you can talk about those and make mistakes. So if I'm talking to Sarah and Sarah says something to me, and I'm able to talk to her and say, well, Sarah, how you keep asking about my hair. Why do you keep asking about my hair? My hair's my hair. I don't ask about your hair. But we can talk about it because she's coming from a naivety of space. We can talk about that as against, calling me the N-word, which is a bit different because you're thinking, I can call you the N-word because everybody calls that because they do it because, it's on music or whatever. So it's being understanding about the landscape and also what that means. And the last thing is, which people get very upset about, is the curriculum and teaching. Talking about racism or sexism within what you teach, you need to have confidence and you need to understand the space. Being able to have that space and hold those conversations, I think, are really important. So hopefully that gives you a little bit. It is about confidence and knowing who you are. I think that helps.
Right. Okay, just building on what Victoria said, and I think as well from an organisational point of view, it's really important to create these sort of spaces where people can come along and talk about what it is that, the barriers that different groups are facing, and that it's really important to, this is again building on what Victoria said, it's very specific issues in a specific context. So look at what specific issue in your organisation and who are the people this is affecting, and then work from that very sort of concrete problem and try and brainstorm some sort of solution that works for the people that are around the table. I think it's really important to have that sort of very localised, in an organisation. If disabled women, for example, are having problems accessing a certain room, talk about this, create a space where this can be spoken about, and then, a solution or interventions can be co-created with the people who've got the power to make the change. And then because we are complex, individuals are complex, and we need to take people on board as their whole and provide spaces where people can come and talk about their experiences, their everyday experiences, how they feel them and how they experience them, and then create some sort of solutions based on that. Sorry, I'll pass it to you.
Yes, I agree with my colleagues. I think that what they are describing is a deep communal learning that comes from these conversations. This is much more than awareness raising. It's more than an hour once a year in a seminar on unconscious bias. This really goes to the heart of who people are and how people meet one another in this space. And there is a deep learning that comes from that ripples out through the organization, and indeed ripples out into the lives of the people that experience that deep learning, that respectful understanding, and that active listening to one another. So I would not underestimate the power behind these kinds of spaces to explore how different people live in the world of the institution, or live more widely in the world, because you'll always find that in these conversations, the experiences that people bring to the table are experiences about living and belonging or not in the institution, but also living in society as well. And I think that as academic institutions, we have our own ethical and moral responsibility to our society more generally to be forward thinkers, to have that respectful space where people listen to one another and together create a better place for everyone in it, where everyone feels that they belong. And that intersectional discussion can be very uncomfortable. It's not very easy as a white woman to be told, well, you never thought about me as a black woman and my experience. It's not very comfortable to be told that. It's not very comfortable to be told by a woman with a disability, why have you never thought that putting me on the 5th floor of the building helps me in my work? Why have you never asked yourself that question? So, you know, we have to take, every single one of us has to take responsibility for being open to listening to hard things that other people tell us. But in that openness, true friendships are built and true change can happen.
Can I say one last thing, please, Sarah? I just wanted to also, I mean, I've worked in lots of places, including Ireland, and done a lot of work in Germany, and they are, you know, mostly very white, right? And I've gone in there and done some work and taught students. And the first thing I've done with the students when I'm doing the work I'm doing is to ask them who they are and really unpack their own self and their own whiteness and what that means in the context of what we're doing within the space. And I think the last thing I wanted to say, because I think this is important, is about understanding our positionality. And our positionality as researchers, as whatever we are in this room, because that's where the power lies, is your own positionality, and that's how you use that within our research and within in that other spaces as well. So I don't want you to think, oh well, Victoria, she works in London. I work at a London university, but I brought up in a white space, and I've worked in Scotland, and I've worked in Ireland, and I've done work in Germany, etc., etc. And even in Brazil, I mean, even me coming into Brazil, in a space in Brazil and trying to do what I'm doing, I need to understand the context. But yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to go to the next question because we don't have a lot of time, and then really we want to later to open the floor for questions. My next question is a question that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. You have heard it before, and it is about measurable evidence and quantitative evidence and data. And usually when we are trying to do gender equality plans that are inclusive, that are intersectional, or that take that intersectionality perspective seriously, the first thing that institutions ask is where? Well, we need data. We need a measure, and that can be intersectionality. Needs to be quantified, but we don't have the data because a lot of the data cannot be obtained, for instance, because of GDPR constraints, etc. So then intersectionality is as if it cannot be done or it cannot be. I wonder if that kind of focus on measure is in a way undermining what all intersectionality is about, and whether this kind of focus on the quantitative side, is it a resistance, a clear resistance to intersectionality? So who wants to take it?
Thank you, Sarah, for that question. And evidence is a prerequisite for change to happen and to come about. And in my experience, I have had to present the evidence for change to my rector and to my colleagues at the senior table, many of whom were very keen to deny that this was real evidence, that there was a flaw in the methodology, or that there was that I was exaggerating the issue. And so I find that, number one, evidence is important. Quantitative evidence is not always the best kind of evidence in certain circumstances. And what I realized, not always, it took me some time, is that the people that are looking, when we talk about institutions, we kind of talk about it in an atomized, distant way. But institutions are made up of people. We are the institution, and people have emotion. And I learned that that telling on behalf of others, but telling stories using other people's words, was an important part of evidence. Perhaps not quantitative evidence, but evidence of culture, evidence of systemic issues within the cultural landscape of the university that if the university was to move forward, it was going to have to address. So, for example, we have a nationally mandated program that we must address an issue of race in Ireland, a specific issue around the traveller community. Now, the traveller community are, to all intents and purposes, white people, but they are from a particular racialized group of people. They have their own ethnic identity, and they are very, very significantly marginalized in Irish society. Just to give you one example, the life expectancy of a traveller male is between 45 and 50 years of age. Now, that is shocking in a developed, rich country like Ireland, and we are mandated to create spaces within the university to bring students from traveller backgrounds into the university. In order to give weight, to say that, look, we're not talking just about numbers here, and these are small numbers. We're not talking about numbers here. We are talking about people's lives and people's expectations. And so, in order to do that, two of my colleagues who were very, very close to working with the traveller community organised a whole session for our leadership team with the organisation that represents travellers, whom they were travellers themselves. And that seminar did more to change the perspective of the senior leadership team in terms of introducing measures to encourage traveller boys and girls into our university. So the evidence is not always quantitative. In this issue, the spaces that we were mandated to bring in was 10 or 11 a year. In a university that takes in 6,000 students a year, 10 or 11 places is nothing, is absolutely nothing. But it needed that work around stories, around experience, around how these travellers from Pave Point, which was the traveller organisation, how they got their education, how they went through their lives, and how much it meant for them to have that opportunity for their children and their grandchildren. That made the difference. So that kind of evidence is as strong and as powerful as putting the number 11 into our strategic plan.
Thank you, Yvonne. And it's a good explanation that evidence is not just numbers, okay, that usually they are seen as equivalent. Maybe, Rachel, you want to go next, because this is a topic that I have been in 2 knowledge and exchange events in Inspire. And in both of them, this was like a big question and topic for discussion. So,
following on from Yvonne, on the same
question.
I think this is a very interesting topic, because I think there is like a misconception as well about JDPI, that you cannot collect quantitative data on certain sensitive categories. You know, if it's self-identification, you can actually collect this sort of data. So on one side, there's this part, but the other side, following on what Yvonne was talking about, you know, storytelling, we're doing some different case studies in the Inspire project all throughout Europe about looking at the impact of various different interventions to make universities, research performing organizations more inclusive. And when I was carrying out one of the interviews, you know, someone told me, you know, a story about the impact of one of the interventions that they'd carried out, and it was a very powerful story. So, for example, the whole of the university had undergone training looking at equality, looking at diversity, inclusion, and it really centered on, you know, 3 main concepts: empathy, respect, and also the ability to say no. This was quite an interesting, you know, way to frame these kind of, you know, inclusive initiatives. And, you know, the woman who I was speaking to, she was actually a vice dean in the department. And she said she attended an event at the university shortly after this training. And there were also, you know, a lot of people were stood around. There were some senior white male colleagues and some less senior female colleagues of colour from various different religions. And one of the senior white male colleagues had a glass of alcohol in his hand. And he said, "I need to go to the toilet. Can you hold my glass?" And he passed it to a female colleague who did not drink for her religious beliefs. And she's turned around, she said, "No, I cannot hold, you know, no, I can't." And just the very, you know, and the woman who was telling me this story said that she felt that this woman was able to say no because it had been mandatory training for the whole of the university to listen and to say it is okay to say no in certain situations. It is okay to say no. You can say no. And that this woman felt empowered to say no to holding this. And this is very small. This is a very, very small impact. But, you know, it's this sort of cultural change that we're talking about. And these sort of cultural changes are very difficult to measure. But, you know, telling this story is quite powerful. So I think it's really important that we respect different ways of demonstrating what it is we want to demonstrate. And if we're thinking about creating a more equal environment, a more inclusive organisation, we have to be creative in thinking about how do we do that, and what is the aim that where do we want to go? I'll hand over to. Do you want to do the question?
Victoria, if you want to add anything?
I'll just do a couple of seconds, otherwise you're running out of time. I think what I would say, quants complements qualitative. And I think having quants and being able to utilize it as well, I think is really important. I chair the Athena Swan for my faculty. My faculty is a large faculty, and I led them to the silver. Now, the Athena Swan, we don't have the JEPs, we have Athena Swan. And so within that is evidence-based. It is all evidence-based. And so when people say X, Y, and Z, it is all evidence-based, and that's what you're dealing with. So I just wanted to mention that, really.
Thank you. My next question also from coming from the keynote, if you remember, Victoria, at the beginning of the intersectionality, it is a radical critique of power. That is, it has a political goal of transformation. Now, if it is, and I'm going here to merge two questions, if it is a radical critique of power, intersectionality means or implies a redistribution of power. Now, redistributing power in an institution carries risks and also a lot of resistances. So this is for all of you in your experience. What kind of risk are leaders of these institutions ready to take? And which ones are no? I'm not saying like no, but they try to avoid. They try to avoid, and with, that kind of resistances. So I'm sure, you are all, yeah.
Let Victoria go first.
Yes, sure.
Okay, yeah, this is an interesting one. If we think about the institution, do they think about their reputational damage? That's a big one. When you think about promotion and who gets promoted, who doesn't get promoted, it's very political. You might think it's not, but it's quite political. When you're sitting in your chairs and there's an opportunity where you could get a research funding program or funding possibility, and there's somebody else who's also got the same opportunity, and the person who gets it is not somebody looking like you, and you're furious because you think, well, actually they only got it because they're not white. They are not white. That becomes a challenge in yourself because you think, you could be both good, but this one got it. Perhaps they did get it because they want to have more representation within the space, but that hurts you because you've been working for the last 15 years and you've got to that stage, and now someone's taken that. That's an issue. That makes you feel very uncomfortable. What do you do with that risk? Do you make lots of noise about it and do a whispering campaign and say, well, you know what, Victoria is not the right person to do this, and look at, she only got this. So the whispering campaign goes around the whole university. And so when the person gets that funding, no one really wants to congratulate them because they're part of that whispering campaign. You may think I'm being silly or being flippant, but you need to think about that. The other aspect is you might want you become a white savior. So you speak for the person and say, oh, what Rachel's saying is this, and Liz, as though Rachel can't speak for herself because Rachel is from a minority background or got a disability or LGBTQ+, that in itself is pathetic. Don't talk for us. Let us talk for ourselves. But then even bigger, when you think about pay, no one talks about pay. It's a big thing. How much money do you get? How much money do you get, Rachel? Do you get the same as me, or have you got 5,000 extra? Or do you get 20,000 extra? Pay is a big thing. And to be able to talk about that, one thing I do like about the US when it comes to that is all publicized.